Good morning, Narad.
Good morning, Maurice.
It's wonderful to have you this morning with us. And for a wonderful change, the interviewer today is the interviewee. We all have known you for now quite a long time, and yet there are lots of things I'm sure that we do not know. Let us begin by asking you how you discovered this path.
Oh, I'll have to go way back. They say hindsight is 100%, but maybe only for one life. There are three rivers of grace I have received from Sri Aurobindo and Mother. From Sri Aurobindo, poetry. From Mother, flowers and music. So I'd like to begin by telling you my first experience with flowers and how she prepared me all this time for the matrimonial gardens, for the work with the flower significances, etc. I was only 4 years old or so. And one day we lived in a little town, Dumont, New Jersey, USA. A small house, but a nice garden in the back. And we always had fruits and vegetables that my father grew, but my mother grew flowers. And one day, as a little tot, I saw these hyacinths in bloom, and the fragrance was so incredible. Mother named them Pride of Beauty. And with my little hands, I tore off every flower to bring it to my mother. And, and the tears I saw on her face were tears of joy and sorrow. That was the first experience with flowers. And in our house, there was an arbor of roses, and I've written poems on it. So fragrant, red roses that I didn't know represented human passions changed into love for the divine. But I would walk out from the sun porch, as we called it, because it was warm even in winter, and I would go out. Now, the next thing that I remember is about the age of 6. My mother was dying. She had 105-degree Fahrenheit temperature, and above that 1 degree, and there's brain damage. All the doctors had given up on her. They had no idea what to do. Her family was large, 4 brothers, 4 sisters, and all were around her bed in that little house, in tears. And one brother said, there's a monk from Athos staying now in Pennsylvania, in a monastery there. I hear he has some power. So they said, let's go and get him, because there's no more hope for our sister. We, two little boys, I might have been 6, my brother 5, we had to go and meet this man. And we had to learn Russian, Otchets, which means father. So that was pounded into our ears on the 2-hour ride. Здравствуйте, Otchets Afanasi. Good, hello, Father Afanasi. So we met him, and he came to the house. Tall, absolutely silent, dignified man in black robes, which even as a kid I remember were not too clean. And they ushered him into the house, and he had in his hand a little bowl of water. And I'll never forget this moment. He walked into the bedroom, looked at my mother, dipped his fingers in the water, and 3 times threw them on her face. She gets up and she says, "Oh, you're all here. I have to go in and make dinner for you." And she goes in and makes dinner. this was my first experience of the miraculous, and I attribute it only to Mother and her grace. Then a long period of study in the little school there, and since I had been gifted with a very strong bass voice, I received a scholarship from Regina Resnick, one of the great mezzo-sopranos of the Metropolitan Opera, to study for the Met, and also 4 years in college that she gave me a scholarship for. But prior to that, there's a story about my father and the church, and this is very important.
The Russian Orthodox Church.
The Russian Orthodox Church, yes.
Right.
He was Roman Catholic, brought up. Oh, and I should tell this story just as an aside because it's so incredible. You know, Switzerland in those days where they lived, there was tremendous poverty. And I understand that from him that his father probably died of malnutrition. And his mother said, I'm going to take you to America. He had 2 sisters, and they were all roughly the same age. One sister was older, one younger. And she brought them on the ship to Ellis Island, where all people had to come. And there were some family relatives already living in America, because you had to have that connection. So she gets there and goes up to the processing window and gives all the information. And they said, where are your relatives? No relatives. They said, we're very sorry, we have to send you back.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother puts one child on her shoulder and the other 2 and begins walking into the ocean. And she's halfway in, and they stop her. They bring her back. Half an hour later, the relatives come. They were delayed. So I might have chosen my parents, but it was a little touchy.
Yeah.
So anyway, my brother, my youngest brother at this time, was dying, and all the blood had dried up in his veins. So my father went to the local priest, and he said, would you please pray for my son? And the priest went. My father walked out, never came back again. Joined my mother's church, and converted my brother and the kids. I wasn't too happy about it, but what it gave me was the beauty of a cappella choral music, because in Russian churches only the voice is allowed, no instruments. And since that's when my voice was discovered, I joined the choir and heard music like I've never heard before. And that was the beginning of what we'll later recount when I met Mother. So, where do we go from here? I've had many, many surgeries, 11 actually.
Already at a young age?
Yes. Well, they've occurred through the years, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, she was always there, but I didn't know it. But in this little church in New York, there was an icon of the Virgin Mary. And people would go before that icon and they would kiss it. And I prostrated myself before it.
Mm-hmm.
And only now I know that it was Mother whom I was bowing to. So I attend college, and I can't handle the dogma and ritual of the church, and I begin searching.
Mm-hmm.
My search takes me to Rudolf Steiner, and here we go now into the anthropomorphism and the bio
Yeah.
dynamic way of gardening, horticulture, farming. I actually met those people. And there's an interesting story here because Mother wrote to a friend of mine, Mercier,
Hmm.
an elderly man at the time when he came, about organic gardening. And she said, no, no, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past because they wanted to use chemicals. And Mother said, no. So I go into this place called Threefold Farms. And I meet a man, Dr. H. Kerpf. And he treats me like an adult. Here I am in my teens, my late teens or so. And he takes me into his laboratory and says, I want to show you something. He takes an apple and cuts a very thin slice, puts it on some paper that captures the aura.
I see.
Yeah, they have a term for it. I forget it.
Yeah, this
right.
Kirillin photography.
Something like Carolyn photography, yes.
Right.
And he asked me to look in the microscope. And there I see circles, one after another, in brilliant colors and totally static. He says to me, that is a chemically grown apple. And he cuts another one and puts it on. Same thing. I look down. The circles are there and everything is just like that, with flashing light. He said, that's an organic apple. And I met the people there, saw how they were farming. But in the end, it was not for me. And I kept looking. So then I had another surgery and went to California. And in California, staying with my aunt and uncle, all the flowers were there. I mean, it was an incredible sight for a young man. I watched the hummingbirds, and you could get up to 2 inches away from them, feeding on the hibiscus, which later we'll talk about in another series because Mother named some 43 different hibiscus. She loved hibiscus. Now, returning from there, I'm sitting in the front seat and I see an Indian man about halfway back, and the seat is empty next to him. So I go and I say, could I speak with you and ask you some questions? He said yes. His name, Pandit Bekpati Sinha. Well, that night was unforgettable. He answered everything as I had never heard anyone be able to synthesize all of my questions about religion, spirituality, faith, and everything.
But was this your first experience of India?
Yes, my very first. So, being in New York, and he living in New York with a Swedish wife and 2 little girls, I attended his classes. And I remember one thing only, that one day a man said, oh yes, I know this Aurobindo. He's the one who says in 100 words what could be said in 10. And that's all, nothing more. So then, one day he says to me, would you like to go to Shantiniketan and continue your musical studies with Eastern music also? I can get you a full scholarship, except for your passage. You'll have to pay your passage. So, whoa, I didn't have any money.
How old were you then?
22. So I worked 2 jobs. I worked landscaping with my father for about 10 hours a day or more. And then I worked in the evenings on a drill press. and saved up enough money. So he said, follow me out to California, take a freighter from there. So I did. And stayed with the couple who were generous and helped me. And a week goes by, another week goes by, another week goes by. I find out that he's in with some wealthy ladies in California. And he comes to me one day and he says, everything has fallen through. If you truly want to do yoga, go back to your family and practice samatha. Something rose up in me even as a young man, and I looked in his eyes and I said, no, I am going to India. Within a day or two, I met Jyoti Priya, Dr. Judith Tyberg,
Right.
at the East-West Cultural Center. We'll talk a lot about that at a later time. She says to me, but you're meant to go to Mother. And in those days, you had to send a photograph and a sample of your handwriting.
But tell us, how did you meet Jyoti Priya?
I just had heard about this East-West Cultural Center, that there were talks and things like that. I just went there, and that was it. That sealed my soul's fate. So she sends this to Mother. Mother sends back a telegram. Tell him he may come and stay as long as he likes.
You were 23 then.
I was just about to turn 23, yes. Mm-hmm. So I left on a freighter, on a Japanese freighter. And it was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life. Because what happened? They took the Alaska route.
Mm-hmm.
The ship was filled with redwood logs, 200 feet long, that big around. And we ran into a typhoon. And I watched those logs splinter off the boat like toothpicks. And the ship was like this. So the captain calls me up to his folks or whatever, the headquarters up there, and all the staff were on their knees. They were Shintos. And he says to me, 1 degree more and we capsize. I said to him, I'm going to see Mother. It's not possible. We will not capsize. And I made it to Japan. And see, now the connection with Japan and Mother.
Yeah.
I mean, everything she has guided all the way. Shall we stop for this 20 minutes and then continue another time?
Yes.
Okay.